On November 7, 1898, a lead-gray fog wrapped around the Tongass National Forest in southeastern Alaska. John Donovan's camp sat in the forest near the river valley by Moresby Bay. The campfire had long gone out. A metal pot lay upside down on the damp moss, and beside it were half a bag of flour and a rusty hunting rifle. These were the only traces Donovan's companions found when they arrived. As for Donovan himself, he had vanished as if he'd been swallowed by the earth, leaving no sign at all. Searchers inspected the area around the camp and found no marks of a struggle and no claw prints from wild animals. What they did find was a strange trail of footprints in the mud. The front half of each print looked human, with clearly defined toes, but the back half gradually narrowed and split, eventually turning into the webbed tracks, characteristic of an otter, like something terrifying and unknown had left them behind. Following the prints, the rescue team traced them for about 200 meters until they reached the icy river, where the trail disappeared into the fog-shrouded shoreline. 3 days earlier, 27-year-old Donovan had entered the forest alone to search for a lost hunting dog. This adventurer, who had lived through the Klondike Gold Rush, seen the Yukon River frozen for miles, and survived blizzards across the Yukon Plateau, had confidently thumped his chest before leaving, telling his companions that it was just a forest, and he'd find his dog and return safely before sunset. But the Tlingit guide traveling with them had gone pale, grabbed his arm, and repeated a strange word in broken English, Kushtaka. He warned Donovan again and again never to answer any crying voices in the fog, or it will take you away. At the time, Donovan dismissed it as native superstition, but 7 days after he went missing, the search team found the corpse of his dog wedged between rocks downstream in the river valley. The loyal mixed-breed dog was curled up, its throat torn by something sharp, its eyes wide open, the pupils reflecting an indescribable terror. As for Donovan, he was never seen again, becoming just one more of the countless people who disappeared in the Tongass forest. More than a century later, when historians at the University of Alaska dug up this 19th century missing person report, they discovered an even more chilling detail. On the trunk of a cedar tree near Donovan's camp, someone had carved a series of twisted symbols. After elders of the Tongass tribe examined them, they confirmed the markings were an ancient tribal warning sign, meaning Kushtaka has appeared. In other words, the tribe had long believed Donovan's disappearance was the work of the Kushtaka. Very few people know that the 6.8 million acre stretch of temperate rainforest in southeastern Alaska is one of the most paradoxical wildernesses on Earth. It sits on the edge of the Arctic Circle, yet it is nourished by the warm, moist air currents of the Pacific, making it the only temperate rainforest in North America. It contains some of the densest vegetation in the world. Ancient spruces and cedars intertwine their branches into an impenetrable canopy, and the ground is covered with half a meter of humus that gives off a muffled, almost human-like groan when stepped on. It rains more than 200 days a year, and the fog rarely lifts. Even at noon, sunlight can only slip through the cracks in the foliage, casting mottled, ghost fire-like patches of light onto the forest floor. Rivers carve steep gorges through the landscape, and underground streams crisscross beneath the surface. The water temperature stays between 0 degrees Celsius and 4 degrees Celsius year-round, and the submerged currents are strong enough to overturn a small boat in under 3 minutes. Even seasoned fishermen won't go near deep water on foggy days, and those caves hidden behind the reefs are known among the Tlingit people as the nests of the Kushtaka. The Tlingit are one of the oldest indigenous groups in Alaska, living off fishing, hunting, and gathering. Their ancestors have passed down the belief that the forest breathes and the rivers speak. To the Tlingit, who have lived here for generations, this forest is not a resource but a living organism. It is clear that in traditional Tlingit culture, humans and nature are not opposing forces, but parts of a single symbiotic whole. They believe every ancient tree, every river, and every animal possesses its own spirit. But these spirits are not all benevolent. In the Tlingit oral tradition, the wilderness is home to countless non-human beings, embodiments of nature itself. Some are protective, such as the salmon spirit symbolizing harvest, while others lure and trap the unwary. And among all these legends, the Kushtaka is the most terrifying presence of all. Often translated as otter spirit, the name sounds harmless, but it is anything but gentle. It is a tempter walking the boundary between human and beast, life and death, the deadliest hunter in the Tongass forest. The legend of the Kushtaka can be traced back to the Tlingit creation myths. In the tribe's oral epic, The Walker in the Mist, it is said that at the dawn of the world, humans and animals were no different and could freely shift between forms. But a group of greedy humans violated the laws of nature. They overharvested salmon and burned forests to drive out wildlife. As punishment, the Creator bound their souls to otters, trapping them forever in a form halfway between human and animal. These beings became the Kushtaka. A record preserved in the archives of the Alaska Native Cultural Preservation Center contains an interview from 1978 with Tlingit elder George Jackson. In the interview, Jackson explained that the Kushtaka's body is half human and half otter. Their skin is smooth like an otter's, yet they have human-like faces. Their hands and feet are webbed, yet they stand and walk upright like humans. The Creator cursed them with eternal hunger, forcing them to survive by absorbing the life essence of humans. But the Creator also granted them a sliver of mercy. If a person can resist their temptation, the Kushtaka must guide that person safely out of the wilderness. It is clear that in Tlingit tradition, the Kushtaka is not evil by nature, but a pitiful being bound by a curse. They retain fragments of human memory and long for their lost families. For this reason, they often imitate human cries to lure their prey. The cry of the Kushtaka is not a shrill scream, but a soft, helpless whimper, like a lost baby or an injured woman, enough to make anyone with compassion drop their guard and follow the sound. But behind this temptation lies a deadly trap. Once someone is lured by a Kushtaka to a riverbank or a cave, the creature immediately drains the life essence from their body. Their soul is consumed by the Kushtaka, and their body slowly transforms into a new Kushtaka, doomed to wander the wilderness forever, repeating the cycle of temptation, consumption, and transformation. However, the legend does not exist in just one version. In another branch of the Tlingit people, those living on Admiralty Island, the Kushtaka is depicted as a neutral being. It does not actively harm those who respect nature. Instead, it will guide lost hunters through the fog and even provide food during extreme weather. But if someone desecrates nature, such as killing a pregnant animal, destroying a salmon spawning ground, or burning an ancient tree, the Kushtaka reveals its terrifying face and lures them to their deaths. This seemingly contradictory set of stories actually reflects the Tlingit philosophy of survival. Nature is both a generous provider and a harsh punisher, and the Kushtaka is nature's enforcer, protecting the natural balance in the most unsettling ways. According to Tlingit oral accounts and historical documents, the Kushtaka possesses several horrifying abilities that shape its identity as a deadly tempter. The most well-known of these is its ability to mimic human voices. Tlingit hunters say that the Kushtaka's cries are highly deceptive, able to perfectly imitate the voices of different people. If you long for your family back home, it will mimic a relative calling your name. If you are worried about a lost companion, it will mimic their cries for help. Some legends even claim it can imitate the tone of the person you miss the most and speak secrets known only to the two of you, causing you to drop your guard instantly and fall into its trap. For example, in 1906, missionary David Evans recorded such a case in his book, Beliefs of the Alaska Natives. A Tlingit hunter heard the cries of his long-missing son in the fog. "Dad, I'm cold," spoken in the exact voice the boy had as a child. Overwhelmed, the hunter followed the sound, but when he reached the riverbank, he saw a half-human, half-otter creature staring at him with cold, empty eyes. The hunter instantly remembered the tribe's warnings and tried to flee, but it was already too late. Behind him came sharp bursts of laughter, part otter screech, part human mockery. The hunter became one of the missing from that day forward. Beyond voice mimicry, the Kushtaka also has powerful shape-shifting abilities. In Tlingit legend, it can shift freely between three forms. One is a full otter form, indistinguishable from an ordinary otter, impossible for most people to detect. Another is the half-human, half-otter form, with a human torso but an otter's head and limbs. The third is a fully human form, usually appearing as a young woman or a child, making it especially effective at lowering the guard of passing strangers. Even more eerie is its ability to manipulate fog and water. Tlingit elders say that whenever the Kushtaka appears, thick fog rises around it, even on a clear day, plunging everything into total darkness. The fog not only blinds vision, but induces hallucinations, causing people to see what they most fear or most desire, stripping them of judgment and their sense of direction. The Kushtaka's control over water allows it to turn a calm surface into a whirlpool or hidden current within seconds, pulling anyone near the riverbank into the depths. Once struck by the force of the water, a person quickly loses all ability to resist, becoming prey for the Kushtaka. There is another belief as well. The Kushtaka can steal a person's shadow. If someone meets its gaze in the fog, their shadow will be taken. And once a person loses their shadow, they will mysteriously disappear within 3 days, never to be found again. Because of this, an ancient ritual still survives in Tlingit villages. Before heading into the wilderness, hunters coat their bodies with a paint made of cedar and salmon oil. It is said this paint protects one's shadow from being stolen by the Kushtaka. These seemingly fantastical descriptions are considered truth within Tlingit culture. For those living in such extreme environments, the wilderness itself is a labyrinth of unknown dangers. The Kushtaka legend simply gives shape to these unseen threats, turning them into a tangible, comprehensible monster. Since the 19th century, Alaska's Tongass region has repeatedly reported disappearances and sightings linked to the Kushtaka legend. Most of these cases occurred on foggy days or in remote river valleys, and the scenes often showed almost no physical evidence, leaving investigators with nothing to work with. For example, in 1932, Mary Thorne's bizarre experience was reported by the local newspaper, the Alaska Voice. At the time, Mary was fishing in a bay near Juneau with her daughter when a dense fog suddenly rolled in. Moments later, they heard the sound of a baby crying from within the fog. Curious, the daughter tried to run toward the noise, but Mary grabbed her tightly. Then they saw something like an otter, but also like a person crouched on a rock, staring at them. Mary immediately understood. It was a Kushtaka. She didn't hesitate and rowed the small boat away as fast as she could. After they returned home, she discovered that her daughter's hair was mysteriously soaked, and her body carried a faint, fishy smell. To the Tongass people, that scent unmistakably belonged to the Kushtaka. In 1953, a small aircraft crashed near the Tongass National Forest. All 5 crew members and passengers disappeared. Around the wreckage, the search team found strange footprints, human-shaped at the front, otter-like webbing at the back, leading toward a nearby lake. Even stranger, a passenger's jacket was found hanging on a tree by the lake. The jacket was marked with claw scratches that matched the shape of an otter's paws, except they were twice the size of those of a normal otter. The most shocking incident was the 1972 Craigtown mass disappearance. 5 fishermen from Craig set out to sea on a foggy day and never returned. Days later, their fishing boat was found near the shore of a nearby island. All equipment and food on the boat were untouched, and the engine was in working condition, yet the crew had vanished. On the deck, someone discovered a symbol drawn in fresh blood. After examining it, Tongass elders identified it as a Kushtaka mark, meaning, "These people belong to me." These cases share several common features. All the missing individuals encountered fog. All the scenes contained evidence associated with the Kushtaka, such as strange footprints, unusual symbols, and a faint fishy odor. And none of the scenes showed signs of struggle, as if the victims willingly followed something into the fog. Scientists have attempted to explain these events. Some believe the thick fog caused hallucinations and disorientation, leading fishermen or hunters to accidentally fall into the water. Others think water otters were misidentified. The so-called half-human, half-otter creatures might simply have been otters viewed from deceptive angles. Still others argue that bears or other wild animals were involved, and the footprints were distorted by rain or water. But none of these explanations fully make sense. In the 1972 mass disappearance, the fishing boat was intact, with no signs anyone had fallen overboard. In the 1953 plane crash case, the footprints were far too large to belong to ordinary otters, and the Kushtaka symbols identified by tribal elders could not have formed naturally. What's even harder to ignore is the attitude of the Tongass people toward these cases. They never believed the missing individuals died by accident. They are certain the Kushtaka took them. Even today, Tongass villages maintain an old custom. If someone goes missing, the family will not search near the river or in the fog. Instead, they gather at the village ritual grounds, light a bonfire, and recite ancient incantations, hoping the Kushtaka will spare the lost person's soul. Entering the 21st century, with advances in technology, transportation, and communication in the Tongass region have become far more convenient. Yet sightings related to the Kushtaka have never stopped. These modern cases, now backed by photos, videos, and other strong evidence, remain filled with mystery, leaving science unable to provide reasonable explanations. In 2003, an American hiker named Mark Anderson captured a strange video while camping in the Tongass National Forest. In the footage, a blurry figure moves along a fog-covered riverside. The figure is about 1.5 meters tall, human-shaped, but its movements are as agile as an otter's. It repeatedly lowers its head, as if sniffing the ground. Mark said he heard what sounded like a baby crying, so he raised his phone and filmed in the direction of the sound. That's when he recorded the figure. When he tried to move closer, the figure suddenly turned around, revealing a face covered in gray fur, then leaped into the river and disappeared. After the video was uploaded online, it sparked widespread debate. Some believed it was fake, while others insisted it was the true appearance of the Kushtaka. In 2017, a scientific expedition team conducting an ecological survey in the Tongass forest encountered something bizarre. While the team was collecting water samples by the river, a thick fog suddenly rose and their instruments began to malfunction. GPS signals vanished and strange wailing sounds came through the walkie-talkies. At that moment, one team member saw a half-human, half-otter creature crouched by the riverbank, staring at them. Terrified, he shouted, and amid the screams, the creature slowly faded into the fog. When the fog finally lifted, the team discovered that all their collected water samples had turned a murky yellow, and on the muddy riverbank was a set of strange footprints, human-shaped at the front, otter-webbed at the back. In 2021, during field research among the Tongass people, Jennifer Lee, an anthropology professor at the University of Alaska, heard about a recent sighting. A fisherman named James Johnson said that while fishing on a foggy day, he saw a little girl in a white dress standing by the river waving at him. He found it extremely odd. Why would a child be standing alone by the river in such cold weather? As he approached, the girl suddenly jumped into the river and transformed into a giant otter before disappearing underwater. James said the otter's eyes were red, filled with an eerie, malevolent energy. These modern sightings are strikingly similar to the ancient legends. Technological progress hasn't lifted the veil of mystery surrounding the Kushtaka. Instead, it has made the creature even more perplexing. Why, in an age of surveillance cameras and widespread GPS, do people still claim to encounter this half-human, half-otter being? Why do instruments fail en masse whenever it appears? To this day, these questions have no answers. If we step outside the framework of superstition and look at the survival environment and cultural background of the Tongass people, the legend of the Kushtaka actually contains profound survival wisdom. The natural environment of the Tongass region is extremely harsh. Thick fog, torrential rain, hidden currents, wild animals, and freezing temperatures. Any one of these factors can lead to death. For the Tongass people, the key to survival lies in respecting nature and staying vigilant. The Kushtaka legend conveys these survival rules to later generations through an extreme and unforgettable form. For example, the warning not to respond to crying voices in the fog is essentially a reminder not to trust unfamiliar signals in dangerous environments and to remain calm and alert. The instruction not to enter the wilderness alone emphasizes the importance of teamwork because in extreme conditions, acting alone means taking on far greater risk. And the rule not to disrespect nature underscores the symbiotic relationship between humans and the natural world. Excessive exploitation brings disaster. According to the elders of the Tongass tribe, the Kushtaka is actually a mirror of nature. What it reflects are the weaknesses of the human heart: greed, curiosity, compassion, longing. Those who fall victim to the Kushtaka are often the ones overwhelmed by their own inner weaknesses, forgetting the dangers around them. Those who manage to escape are the ones who can overcome these weaknesses and hold fast to the laws of survival. From this perspective, the Kushtaka legend is not just a suspenseful tale, it is the Tongass people's survival textbook. Through the most eerie and unforgettable means, it passes down the wisdom of their ancestors, allowing the tribe to survive in an extreme environment for thousands of years. And for those of us living in modern society, the Kushtaka legend carries important meaning as well. It reminds us that no matter how advanced technology becomes, humans remain small in the face of nature. And no matter how far civilization progresses, we must never forget to respect the natural world. The stories we often label as superstition may actually contain ancient people's profound understanding of nature, wisdom worth thinking about and learning from. So in the end, does the Kushtaka truly exist in the depths of the Tongass forest? The scientific community generally says no. They believe the Kushtaka legend is simply the Tongass people's interpretation of natural phenomena and unknown dangers. Those so-called sightings are, in their view, hallucinations, misunderstandings, or deliberate fabrications. For example, the alleged half-human, half-otter creature could just be the shadow of an otter viewed from a certain angle, or perhaps a person wearing unusual clothing. The strange footprints may be human prints distorted by rain or flowing water, or the misinterpreted tracks of bears, otters, or other animals. But some scholars hold different opinions. They argue that there are still many regions on Earth that remain unexplored, and the Tongass National Forest is one of them. This 6.8 million acre rainforest has a harsh climate and complex terrain, with many places humans have never set foot in. It is entirely possible that some unknown species exist there. According to this view, the Kushtaka legend might actually be a description of such an unknown creature, later embellished with mysterious elements over generations of storytelling. There is also another theory suggesting that the Kushtaka may be a supernatural entity, a spirit or energy being that cannot be detected by scientific methods. Although this theory lacks empirical evidence, it also cannot be completely ruled out. After all, human understanding of the world is limited, and many supernatural phenomena still have no scientific explanation. Whether or not the Kushtaka is real, one thing is certain: it has become an important part of Tongass cultural identity and a symbol of the wilderness of Southeast Alaska. Its legend will continue drifting through the fog, continuing to draw people into curiosity, exploration, and contemplation. And those who vanished in the mist, those strange footprints, those eerie cries from within the fog, they will remain forever in the memory of the Tongass forest, forming an eternal mystery. Perhaps one day, with technological advancements and deeper exploration, we will uncover the truth behind the Kushtaka. Or perhaps the mystery will remain forever, an unanswered riddle left by the wilderness for humankind. But regardless of the outcome, the legend of the Kushtaka will endure. It will remind us that in a world full of the unknown, maintaining respect and vigilance is always the first rule of survival. And the wisdom hidden within these ancient stories will continue to drift, like the fog of the Tongass forest, through the long river of human civilization, guiding us forward.